Hi, this is David Douglas, Managing Director of EBO, the digital agency. EBO are the proud sponsors this year of Radio Molly and Molly's digital programme.
For centuries, romance fiction by Irish writers, from Lady Morgan to Marian Keyes, has told the story of characters in love. Yet romance remains a target for public condemnation and critical contempt, in part because these popular novels have been written largely by and for women. In summer 2025, the Museum of Literature Ireland launched the exhibition Happy Ever After, Falling in Love with Irish Romance Fiction, to showcase and celebrate the unique character of Irish romance fiction. I'm Paige Reynolds, professor of English at the College of the Holy Cross in Massachusetts and curator of Happy Ever After. My scholarly expertise rests in modern and contemporary Irish writing, and I'm the author, most recently, of Modernism in Irish Women's Contemporary Writing, The Stubborn Mode, from Oxford University Press. I'm also an enthusiastic reader of romance fiction. Broadly defined, romance fiction focuses on a love story and ends happily. The genre's appeal rests in its depiction of emotion, as well as its recognizable narrative structure, which follows characters as they fall in love and secure their happy ever after. In this series of interviews, I speak with Irish writers who focus on romance in its many and various iterations. These conversations reveal that the designation romance fiction remains a vexed and unfairly constrictive one, but they also confirm the important work done by love stories. Irish romance fiction promises us the familiar satisfaction of a happy ending based in human connection. It also voices aspirations for personal fulfillment and a better society by featuring characters who overcome internal and external barriers to happiness. The exhibition Happy Ever After, Falling in Love with Irish Romance Fiction, covers a range of writers from the anonymous author of a 17th century Irish romance to contemporary writers such as Adiba Jagadar, Cecilia Ahern, and Sue Diven. It's likely that my guest today, Marian Keyes, needs no introduction to readers of romance fiction, or to anyone with a passing familiarity of contemporary Irish writing. Marian is an award-winning novelist and essayist whose books have sold over 40 million copies worldwide and been translated into 36 languages. Her novels, centered on the Walsh family and its 5 sisters, recently have been adapted into a television series, The Walsh Sisters. Like writers from James Joyce to Sally Rooney, Marian's work is steeped in the particularities of Irish culture. And yet her attention to difficult subjects, from addiction and intimate partner abuse to workplace challenges and menopause, speaks broadly and powerfully to her enormous readership. Her novels are filled with real-life challenges for her characters, but they're rich with humor and good feeling, with the promise that humans can be resilient. She's spoken often of her commitment to the happy ending, announcing in The Guardian that, quote, "I would rather never be published than write a downbeat ending," end quote. In this interview, we discuss a range of topics, including Marian's canny use of the flashback and her strategies for writing novels linked in a series. We also consider the utility and allure of a well-worn pair of men's leather pants. This close attention of her female protagonists to details such as these suggests not only romantic desire, but also that women necessarily hone their sensitivity to male bodies and behaviors as a means of self-protection. Today, I have the extraordinary honor of speaking with Marian Keyes, whom I imagine needs no introduction to listeners of this podcast. Marian is, of course, the author of 16
That's right.
novels,
Yes.
and short story collections, a cookbook, and collections of essays and advice over her career. Her first book, Watermelon, was published with Poolbag Press in 1995, which is a press that did a lot of really important work in supporting romance writers. and writers, women writers more generally. And her most recent book is My Favorite Mistake from 2024. She is, of course, an international bestseller with over 40 million books sold worldwide. I'm sure it's probably even more since I looked that up, and translated into 40 languages. She's also, I think, a really important figure for us to be speaking with, not only because of her preeminence as a romance writer, a writer of romance fiction. Let me clarify with that. That's a better title.
Thank
A writer who tackles romance in her fiction, I think is. So we'll come back to this idea, the label of romance writer and what that means and how vexed it is. But she's also somebody who's drawn the attention of an entire body of younger scholars working now. Like, there's some really interesting scholarship coming out in academic journals. Her works are taught in college courses. And, people like Zadie Smith and the critic Elaine Showalter have praised her writing. So what's exciting about Marian is the way in which she has been able to move not only among and between genres, but also among and between registers, right? So that you can just as easily see someone at the beach reading her book as you can see them in a college course reading her book. So it's, again, just a real pleasure to have her with us.
Thank you. God, that was the nicest introduction that I have ever had. I'm serious.
Well,
thank you so much.
I just speak the truth.
Thank you.
So one of the things, you've done a lot of interviews and you've been quoted a lot and a lot of really kind of smart thinking about the work that you do. So I wanted to talk with you in the beginning about something I feel like doesn't get spoken about a lot in terms of fiction that includes romance, right? Given the theme of this exhibit. And that's sort of form, right? And narrative structure, which is just a fancy way of saying like the kind of settings that you create or the kind of things that you do. So for instance, I think you're like a masterful writer of the flashback, right? So that when you're writing, you pull us into a world of the present, but you sort of seamlessly and really powerfully show us what characters think about their past and how it influences their present action. So we can talk a little bit about that, but I wanted to start with a more general question about what it means to build a world around a family, right? So we've spent a lot of time with the Walshes, right? Starting with Watermelon, in 1995 and moving all the way to My Favorite Mistake, right? Which invites us again back into Anna's life post-COVID. So could you talk a little bit about what that means to you? Like when you started Watermelon, did you have a sense of the whole family?
Absolutely not. No. It's so funny, like looking back now, it seems like I had a plan from the beginning. And I hadn't a clue what I was doing when I started writing Watermelon. I hadn't been trying to write. It came, as a kind of a bolt from the blue. And I gave the family 5 sisters because I come from a family of 5, and clearly I had kind of internalized the idea that every family has 5. Now I have 2 sisters, 2 brothers, and I don't know why I made them all female. I have no idea. Everything I did back then was instinctive rather than planned. And I thought I would be lucky if I got 1 book published. But I didn't anticipate, I didn't even think I'd be able to write more than 1. I thought if I can write 1, that would be wonderful. And I had a 3-book deal and I was really afraid about what if I can't deliver. And I thought maybe the second one could be a collection of short stories, but I don't know. And the second book wasn't a Walsh one, but it was very much in the same... what I was doing was I was responding to the myth of post-feminism with Watermelon and with Lucy Sullivan as Getting Married. The idea that we were told you don't need feminism anymore because you are equal, you will get paid the same as men, sexually you won't be called a slut if you sleep with as many partners as men do. And I was on the ground, not getting paid very much, definitely getting called a slut and not having the same opportunities. So it was that drove me rather than the idea of family. And even now, I don't decide what I'm going to write with my head. It's always something that comes in my gut. It's about, and kind of the return to the Walshes. I eventually wrote about 5 of them over, 18 years. And I had always been opposed to the idea of a sequel because it had always struck me as kind of slightly shortchanging readers. But enough, and also the idea that the happy ever after, I had left Rachel and Luke in a good place at the end of Rachel's holiday. And to write a sequel, you have to go in and break that up because there is no story without conflict, or something has to go wrong. Like, it has to go wrong. There is no story if everything is wonderful. People get really bored really quickly, and I get really bored writing it. But again, when I decided that I could write that story that happens to them, it hadn't happened to me. I had nothing to kind of base it on, but I knew it would fit for them. So, and I mean, I suppose I feel all creativity comes from the subconscious rather than the top part of the head. But what do I like about the family? I mean, okay, I'm very close to my own family, even though the structure is different. You know, it's two sisters and me and two brothers. And there are spouses and there are nieces and nephews, and we're in this kind of odd enmeshment where we seem to like each other, and we enjoy drama, and we enjoy things going wrong. And I'm very, very... You see, okay, I find most people terrifying, but when I'm with them, I don't. And partly it's because there are so many of us that I don't have to have intense one-on-ones with anyone. I can just be in a room with a lot of people around me, telling stories or like interacting, and I am both present and not present. I am there and I know I'm loved, but I'm not having to engage with it or work for it or anything. And I find the different personalities very entertaining, and that's what I like to bring to the Walsh books, because I feel lucky that is part of my life, and it's part of how I feel loved and how I belong. And so by writing the Walshes, they're different to my siblings, but that dynamic of lots of people, different people, you know, different political views, different attitudes to life, overlapping and disagreeing, but never really falling out. I mean, that the bond of love is so strong that we always stop before it gets unpleasant or uncomfortable. And it matters so much to me that it gives me real pleasure trying to recreate it in the Walsh novels. And yeah, even with my favourite mistake, Anna, you know, she's in her late 40s, she's restarting life in the west of Ireland, but I couldn't just give her story on her own. Like, I made many of them come from Dublin, because that is kind of what my own family would do. Maybe not physically, but definitely metaphorically. Everybody knows everything, and it all gets funneled through my mother. She is the great knower of things. And I think because it makes me happy, that I think if I write about it, other people will get pleasure. I mean, and lots of people don't enjoy families, and they find them dangerous or frightening or exhausting or just depressing, or places where there was too much trauma for it to ever be comfortable to revisit it. And I get that too, and I really understand that why the Walsh books would not be for them.
Or conversely, why they are, right? I mean, because for me, you know, as we're going to be talking about the kind of happy ever after, right?
Yes.
Happily ever after for characters, which we often associate with marriage, right? Or betrothal, right? Traditionally, that's the marriage plot, right? You follow, you know, a couple as they meet and they fall in love, and then they overcome something.
Some adversity.
Right. You know, they face some kind of adversity or opposition, and they overcome that, and they get betrothed, or they're married, and they live happily ever after, right? But I think what you're pointing out is, at least for me, the happy ever after is oftentimes the kind of other types of fantasies, like a family that can conflict. I mean, any family like the Walshes that can all go to a small town and share a hotel room and come out and everyone's alive, as they do in My Favorite Mistake, is a family I want to be a part of, right?
Yeah, oh, that is so nice. Yeah, I mean, and the house I grew up in, I mean, it's small. I mean, my mother still lives in it, and for a long time, like, lots of us lived in different countries because that was the way of Ireland in the 80s and the 90s. But at Christmas, we used to all come home, and, you know, there would be like no room at the inn. Like, we would be like 3 to a room, like a tiny room, and it being Christmas, somebody usually got sick, and and it still worked. And I agree with you that there are many kinds of love in life, and I suppose the romantic love is kind of regarded as the purest, or the one to only really to aspire to. But there are so many different kinds, and there's best friend love, or like circle of friends love, or family, as you say, or like for me, my nieces and nephews provide a huge amount of my emotional nourishment. And I suppose I do like to offer that in what I write.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to me because there's a lot in Irish romance now, having taken in so many of them over the preparation for the show, that's focused on sort of families and friendships, because I'm struck by the fact that right now in America, a big thing is kind of small town romance. And I keep thinking about that as a kind of endeavor to imagine a community that's not bifurcated into, say, red states and blue states, or liberal and conservative, or whatever kind of binaries or either ors that the media or politics or culture in general is trying to share, right?
Yeah, I mean, that is such an interesting thing that you've just said. Because yes, I have read some of the small town romances, and it is really, really comforting. And I think it's because the world is presented to us via the media as incredibly polarized, and that you are either with somebody or you are completely against them. And that's terrifying and exhausting. And I think it also encourages us to entrench our position. And it is very, very lovely to know that not everyone who votes for the other side, that they're not evil and they're not that different to you. I think it's really important that we start humanizing each other. And I feel like we've been kind of deliberately encouraged to do the opposite.
Exactly. And that's why I think the popularity of this genre that we're exploring the exhibit is really important, because we're in an era in which empathy is increasingly being considered a liability or a problem.
Yeah.
Like, and the idea that, because even talking about the small town romances in the States, the attention in romance fiction, as with the Walsh Sisters, to the family, I think is really reparative, right? I mean, the idea that this is a country that has really struggled, right? And still to this day has a constitution that says it's the job of the state to ensure that the mother can remain in the home, and, and predicates its whole sense of itself on the family, and the heterosexual family. I mean, despite sort of same-sex marriage legislation. That there's something, I think, about your attention to the family and the attention, among a number of Irish writers in the show, to giving us alternative and kind of like more positive, not
communities,
perfect, but good families, families.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I do think every family is dysfunctional in some sort of a way, but I think you have, well, for me, I've realized you kind of have to take that as like entry level stuff, All families are fucked up in one way or another, and you're not going to unfuck them up. So we roll with it. We take the positives from it, rather than trying to fix people.
Or you immigrate.
Or the dynamics. Or you immigrate. Exactly. I have one sister living in New York, although mind you, she comes back to Ireland a lot. But yeah. I think, again, a lot of people have fantasies about their parents or their families, that one day they will be loved fully and as they should be, or that their siblings will see them for who they truly are. And I think that doesn't really happen for most people. I think we have to learn to parent ourselves, and we have to kind of forgive. Yeah, families you have to do a lot of forgiving for how people fall short of the ideal.
I love the focus on that, because you're right. It's learning how to forgive, right? And that's a lifelong process.
It is.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah.
Well, that's what was really fun about My Favorite Mistake. And I know you've spoken about this before, but to sort of watch this long-term flirtation, friendship, relationship, right?
Yes.
Between Anna and, Narky Joey, or Joey as we come to know him. And as you say, to watch the missteps and the moments of disconnection and even hurt between the two of them, and it's not an easy road for them to recover from that, right? I mean, that much of the novel is watching them try to do that and kind of tripping right?
Yeah.
And then walking another couple of steps and taking one back. And then,
Yes.
Yeah, so.
You see, I think any human being gets to middle age having done a slew of things that we are appalled by, ashamed of, that we wouldn't do now, and that we're probably incapable of kind of fixing. And definitely Anna and Joey, when they meet each other, they've both hurt each other. And they've hurt themselves with various decisions that they made that they thought were right for themselves at the time. So I think anyone who kind of comes to a relationship, later than 23 is going to have, baggage and also kind of maladaptive coping mechanisms that will interfere with communication. And I think it's kind of, when I was younger, I didn't think any of this happened. I just thought people met each other and they fell in love and everything was wonderful. But like, we're all just flawed human beings, like stumbling around in the dark, and we meet somebody and we like the look of them and they smell nice and they're nice to us. But we still have to deconstruct our wall of expectations, or we still have to discover that there are blank spaces in us where there should be responses. And I think that's why a lot of relationships fall down, because we don't realise that the person we are falling in love with, that they are not perfect, and that they think we're perfect. We don't know that we're expected to be perfect, and we don't understand why they aren't. And that's, we're all just flawed. I really think that's a great kind of mantra for life, where we're all flawed, kind of lopsided, missing bits, and we have to kind of be gentler in our expectations of others, and we have to kind of try harder on ourselves to be different, to be better or less or quieter or whatever.
And that your characters, right? I mean, the nice thing about this incredibly long arc of following the Walsh Sisters, right, has been watching them at different life stages, kind of come to that awareness, the sort of sense that, we've watched this character, as you say, with Rachel and Luke, right? We've watched them get their happy ending. Wait, why are we, what happened?
Why are we back here?
Why are we back here?
Yeah.
But to see both the kind of coping skills that they've developed and the ones that they failed to develop and need to continue to work on in that second book, again, Rachel, I think, and the same thing with, anybody out there and My Favorite Mistake, right? The sort of idea of being able to live with those characters, right, in our imaginations, and recognize that being human is hard work, and you mess it up, and sometimes you still get a happy ending even if you mess it up, right?
Yes. Yeah. Well, I mean, happy endings are just about where you stop the story,
right? And
I really do believe that.
I kind of want to underscore that, like the idea that a happy ending is where you stop the story. I think that's really interesting,
because I think in anybody's life, everybody goes through hardship, and everybody goes through times of loss or feeling, will anything ever go right for me? And then things do go right for us, and And then if you stop the story, then that's it. But like, for as long as we're alive, things are going to come and go. We will be given blessings or gifts that we hadn't expected. And then the rug will be whipped from under us when we least expect it. And that is the nature of being a human being. But there will be always times when the things that were taken from us will be given back to us in maybe a different way. Or we will have moments of peace where everything stays as it is, but we have changed. Again, we stop the story there, happy ever after.
Fantastic. Yeah, no, that makes all kind of sense. Can I shift the conversation a little bit? Because just the fact that we talked about the kind of long arc of your career to a thing that we had discussed a little bit before starting the interview, which is my own experience as an American reader who had sort of tumbled into studying Irish literature for my day job.
Yes.
And, I had mentioned that I basically had sort of come of age with you through your fiction. So every time a Marian Keyes book came out, I immediately ordered it, or I would pick it up to read when I was here. But this idea of your capacity to capture the moment in your fiction, in a way that feels alive and not dated. And the reason I think I wanted to talk about this is to think about the longer arc of the show. So one of the early texts that we focus on in the Happy Ever After exhibit is on Annie M.P. Smithson, who was a best-selling romance writer from the early 20th century. And she published a book called Her Irish Heritage in 1917. And the Irish state actually translated this romance novel into Irish.
Yeah.
Because it's such a good lesson for young women, in sort of Catholicism. And so I had never read it, fully. So I went back to read it, and it's so contemporary. So it's 1917, and her characters are working women, like nurses.
Stop.
They go to movies. They also...
That's incredible.
You have to read it. It's on Happy Trust. You can access it. But they have they're meeting to go see Faust at the Gaiety.
Stop.
And I was laughing that you could pull a paragraph out of this 1917 novel, and it sounds as if I were giving instructions to a friend today to meet me at the Gaiety, like meet at the top of Grafton Street by a coffee shop.
Oh my God, I have to read it.
Isn't that crazy? And it made me think of your work because, I feel like so much of the kind of day-to-day experience of living in Dublin, right, was conveyed through the kind of rich detail that you offer. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about anybody out there, right? And so when I went back to read it before our interview, I was charmed by the fact that it brought me, charmed and horrified, because there are a couple of references in the novel to Donald Trump, right? And so one of them is a reference to him as the host of The Apprentice, and another, I think, is to his sort of real estate holdings in the city, because Anna, the main character of that book, has immigrated to New York to work for a cosmetics company. And I was really, it sort of took me back to a time when we could be charmed by Trump in a kind of uncomplicated way. Like that was appointment TV for me and my husband. We just thought it was hilarious. And to go back and read that, in 2025 was, but it was also really striking to me. And I'm not throwing out a false compliment at all. Like that didn't strike me as out of tune, right? It struck me in the same way you would look at a 1917 novel, right?
Yes.
And think this book matters because it's giving me a snapshot of a world to which I would otherwise not have access. Does that make sense?
I do, absolutely.
Yeah. So could you talk a little bit about how you think about sort of the shout outs to Brown Thomas or the shout out, you know what I'm saying? Like how do you think about the way you try to capture a moment?
You see, I didn't know I was doing that.
Oh, interesting.
I mean, what I wanted to do was reflect the lives of contemporary women, of a woman like me, in the world as it was or is. And I mean, definitely as an Irish woman writing for women, I felt quite underrepresented. I felt like that there was no women writing about people like me, and like I read everything, but there was nothing like, I read, say, Jackie Collins or Jilly Cooper, like Maeve Binchy, but there was nobody who felt similar to me. I don't even know what I'm trying to say, but to be Irish, and some of the things have dated so badly. Like apparently in Watermelon, I don't remember this, but somebody said, yeah, well, Claire goes into town and she has drinks and then she drives home, like she's drink driving, and I'm like, but like it was of its time, and like so many things are of its time in the book. Like I wrote it 31 years ago, 31 and a half. And, there's fat phobia in there that like I am appalled by now. But like I was a product of my times, but I suppose what it is authentic. I mean, it is very, very accurate about how I and my friends thought and talked and how we felt about the world, about the opportunities that were or weren't available for us, and what kind of popular culture meant to us. What we expected from relationships with men, or from marriage, or from a job, or like how we managed our money. That was very personal for me. And I liked the idea of Irish women being able to read about themselves. Because, as I said, when I wrote Watermelon, I didn't know if I'd be writing anything else. But I thought, I'm Irish. And funnily enough, I was living in London, but I was back in Ireland because I was in rehab. And I stayed here for a couple of months afterwards. And I thought, yeah, well, I do go to Brown Thomas and I do go to Grafton Street. And these are my places. And it was just nice to not set it in Carnaby Street or Fifth Avenue or wherever, Rodeo Drive. in New Grafton Street. And I had the confidence to do that because at the time, and even when I was growing up, everything Irish felt like a really poor imitation of something the Brits did, like our pop music was like risibly bad compared to what they had, or like our TV shows just looked like really, really weak pastiche. But I thought, I'm Irish. This is Ireland. This is my Dublin, and it was just, and it struck a chord. Again, I had no expectation of a readership, and I thought if there was one, it would definitely never leave Ireland. I thought it's Irish women in Ireland speaking Irish slang. I thought that is really limiting, I thought.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's fair to say that, like, you were one of, if not the most important voice in representing modern, contemporary Ireland, right? With a kind of granular detail. I mean, there are many, many gifted writers in Ireland, right? The tourist board would tell, like, Molly, come to Molly, and you could see them all. But the kind of granular particularities and the kind of realness of a contemporary moment that you represented was, I think, really struck a chord with readers who already kind of, I think lots of readers of English worldwide, and even obviously readers who don't speak English, given the number of translations that you've successfully had of your fiction, there's something about Ireland in the imagination that really resonates with people. And so the idea that you were giving them a kind of very distinctively of the moment Ireland that was different, I think is one of the real strengths of your fiction.
I think the one thing that I did that I'm still really proud of is that I wrote about young Irish women having sex without shame or guilt.
Hear, hear.
Yeah, like I don't recall having read that. I know like lovely writers like John McGahern wrote about, well, I suppose about men having sex, and there were women in it. But like, I wrote about, I suppose, young Irish women having sexual agency because that's what I knew. That's what I saw. And it was no big deal.
Right. The no big deal is one of my favorite things about your work, right? It's just
yeah.
Like, there are so many things that you'll read about, even, I think it was it again Rachel where Claire and her husband were sort of dabbling in swinging, or polyamory, and it was like, yeah, we did this and it's not really working and we haven't quite figured it out, but
we give it our best shot.
And I just thought this is such an exciting representation of a new Ireland because it's this sort of sense of how dramatically over the course of your writing career, perceptions about female sexuality have changed. And that is, at the risk of sounding like, the kind of cliche romance reader, middle-aged lady who's getting her jollies from reading these books. I'm going to say one of the things that I think is enormously impressive about your writing is how distinctive and different and how early on it was doing that, right? So that
Thank you.
I was flipping through the censorship list yesterday for the show and realizing that so many of the books that were banned in the 1980s were actually books about sort of safe sex and sexual pleasure. And these were books that the state was banning, so we're not, like those were the books that in the 80s, the 1980s, the state had singled out as a problem.
That's appalling.
And I highly recommend you look through some of this stuff. It's like How to Please Your Man, or I can't even remember what, one of them actually was called Safe Sex, and I thought, that's not that long ago. And so the idea that you can have that kind of intimacy and also that you can learn, right? Like I love the fact that both Luke and Joey, right, at each point in My Favorite Mistake and again Rachel reference the fact that they read a book, right?
Yes.
So then again Rachel, there's a moment in which Rachel recalls the first time that they had been sexually intimate after she became sober, and Luke sort of reads her body, right? And then he understands that she's uncomfortable, and they stop and talk about their connection based on a book that he had read, right? A kind of self-help book. And then the same thing happens, right, with Joey in My Favorite Mistake, where, he gets slagged by Anna for not being very good in bed, and then he learns and he attributes that to sort of buying a book about it. And I thought to model that for your male and female readers, that like this isn't something our eyes met across a crowded room.
Exactly. Yes, sex isn't a transcendent, crazed, garment rending kind of force of nature. it's usually, unless it's aided by alcohol, which it wasn't in the case of like Luke and Rachel when they reconciled, it's uncomfortable and it's frightening, and it's you're shy and you're trying to, as you say, read the other person's body. And these things are not always instinctive or innate. I try to convey how clumsy it can be. And definitely the first time can be disappointing. Like, that sex is something that, like, you get better at because you don't go into it with the full information. So I try to kind of be realistic in my depictions of it, because I thought, it just seemed that's how it was. And like, there are occasional people where you do have those kind of, as you say, the eyes met and the whole kind of transcendent thing, but that's rare.
Yeah, and then sometimes, is that a story we tell ourselves because we think it? It's really, really interesting. So that might be a good way to kind of transition into a topic that's even more vexed than a discussion of sexuality, which is the title of a romance writer, right?
Yeah.
So I'm curious about this because, I have seen both in America and in Ireland with writers that I've talked to who've written books that fairly closely adhere to, again, the marriage plot, right? They place at the center of the narrative a romantic relationship, right? Straight, queer, young, old, and that couple or overcomes a challenge or an obstacle, right? And then reconciles at the end, not necessarily to get married in the 21st century, right?
Yes,
but there is a kind of sense of together, right? And
yes.
There's a kind of satisfying kind of reconciliation and communication there. So if that's what we've understood to be the marriage plot since basically the days of Austen, what I think is really interesting is the kind of discomfort that many writers who use that recognizable and beloved form, right? Like, Jane Austen. I feel like if I said, Jane Austen, you write romance fiction, that she might go,
mind.
Yeah, exactly.
Do I? Yes.
Yeah. So could you talk a little bit about what that term means to you, why it's uncomfortable, where you embrace it? Just what does it mean to you, Marian Keyes? What does that label mean? Good, bad, and indifferent.
Okay, but it's like really, really complex, because it is almost always used as a pejorative. It's always used to belittle and to diminish. And you see, when I started writing, I definitely wanted to write a love story, but I also thought, I'm just writing about a woman, a bit like me, in the contemporary world. And that's all I've ever tried to do. And I've always included things that are important. Everything from addiction to being raped, but not realizing you're being raped because you're being raped by your ex-boyfriend, or, And I always thought there was more to what I was writing than a love story. And I found that this pejorative label was slapped on me. So it kind of completely erased any social commentary that I was doing. And it erased any other relationships that I celebrated, like a friendship relationship or a familial one. And that it was reduced to silly girly stuff. And I do understand that, those with power will set the agenda. And, we live in a world where, in general, cis hetero men have a lot more power, white ones especially, than any other cohort. And that they will decide what's valuable and what isn't. And that's why, I don't know, golf tournaments are treated like hard news. Or
even though they have predictable rules, right? Because one of the critiques of romance fiction is that it's formulaic, and that it sort of follows this pattern, right? Of we meet, we overcome something, and we get to. And I'm just so a sports game isn't a football game isn't formulaic.
Yeah.
There aren't rules that people follow, and you can't find pleasure within the structures of those rules with a golf game. You have
but but it's because the golf interests, cis hetero men, and romance novels don't, whether that's due to socializing or whether it's due to what other reasons. But because of that, they're not going to prioritize it in any way. And it's not going to, and like...
Despite the fact that it makes all the money.
Yeah, they do like money. I mean, capitalism is an interesting... it's funny that it hasn't actually. But we'll come back to that because I want to talk about Gen Z and Bookshop and everything. And I also think that, like, when you're in a position of power, holding on to power is important. And that means that you try and scare the people that you have more power than. I think a wonderful way to kind of make people feel less than worthy is to mock the things they love. So, pouring scorn on, romance books is a way to make women feel shitty. To feel, oh God, I'm stupid. I should be reading, 5 effective ways to rule the world or whatever.
Or else watching people kill each other and then have that solved. Like the sort of embrace of crime fiction and the denigration of romance fiction is something that I think might be the ultimate driver of this show. Like my desire to curate this.
Yeah.
I was like, why? They're both genre fiction.
It's
What's
so
the problem?
Funny. Yes, I know. And that, I know in many ways that crime fiction also feels that they have been sort of slightly ghettoized, but they don't get anything like the same sexist. The word romance kind of implies weak brains and overactive emotions and prone to crying. Kind of anything that's associated with a weak woman. It's kind of all kind of parceled up together in this pink, glittery, toxic package.
Well, one of the things I wanted to bring up with you, and this fits right in with what you're saying, is, one of the critiques you often hear of romance fiction is sort of the attention to, like, detail, right? Like, oh, her beautiful blue eyes were rimmed with a dark color, or his forearms flex, and they'll say, oh, that's so cheesy. And I wish I could take credit for this observation because it's not mine. It comes from a podcast called Fated Mates that is in America. And one of the speakers on that, who's a romance editor, had pointed out that maybe the reason there's so much kind of nuanced attention to that kind of detail is because that's what women have to pay attention to in order to be safe.
Yes.
Right. You have to learn how to read the room.
Yes. And especially you have to read men because, it's ever present, the fear of being assaulted. It's always there.
Yeah. No, I ask my students that all the time. I'll say I'll have a class of men and women, and I'll say how many, guys, how many of you are scared to walk home alone? Because we have a very kind of cloistered campus, and none of them will raise his hand, and then I'll ask the women, how many of you would feel comfortable walking home in the dark from a party by yourself? Not a single hand goes up, so even in 2025 among sort of more comfortably feminist, college students, that issue of physical safety is still...
It's huge. Like, it is, and it is so ingrained. It's too familiar for me to interrogate it most of the time. And I fear for other women's safety. I was away with my fabulous sister who lives in New York, and she's well able to look after herself. But she was out for drinks with a friend and she was meant to be due back at a certain time and she wasn't. And I was worried about her. And I thought, if that was Tig, my brother, or Niall, would I be worried? And of course I wouldn't.
I know, it's really interesting.
Yeah, that is such a good point about women having to case every situation to find out, how much heavier than me is he? Does he seem like an angry person? Has he got a gentle voice? How safe do I feel with him? Could he turn? Because people do. We're constantly taking in all of this information. Oh, and another thing, I don't know if this is how kind of helpful this is, but the way they say that women are kind of great multitaskers, or great at kind of untangling kind of thorny problems. I just think women they have nothing like as much power as men do. So women have to find more creative ways of getting what they want, because often if we ask for something, can I be allowed to walk home at night and feel safe? They're like, no. Okay, so we find other solutions that are more they feel more like subterfuge, or you carry your keys between your fingers, or you talk to somebody on the phone as you're walking. You know, that we find more complicated solutions to a situation that should be simple, simply because we have no other option.
Yeah, and I think, again, thinking about your writing, the sort of way in which that frames that problem both vividly, as in This Charming Man, right, which is a novel about an abuser, right, and does a really good job, I think, of showing us the facets of abuse, right, that it can be both physical and emotional, right, and that both are damaging, that it's not worse because you come home with a black eye, right?
Yeah.
So I think that book does really important work there. But I think it also is interesting because your novels, I think, very adeptly kind of also, and again, you can push back on this, as many books that focus on romance do, it also spins that in a kind of pleasurable and positive way, right? So you give us the dark side, but you also give us, how the real men look in leather pants, right?
Yes.
And the fact that they have a tear on the back of the leather pants, and that's how the girls can figure out that, they're sharing the, in Rachel's Holiday, they're sharing the one pair of leather pants among them, because the young women in that novel, right, are so highly attuned to the detail. And as you say, there's a dark side of that, which is we have to be, otherwise we could be killed, right? But then there's also the other side of both humor.
Yeah. Yes, but also an appreciation of a sexy person.
Oh, Luke is 100% my book boyfriend. Yeah. Let's just put it out there. I'm a grown woman who's a professor who should never say that out loud. And yet I'm just like, oh.
Yeah. I mean, it is really enjoyable to create men like Luke Costello. And they're not all. I mean, there's a book called The Break where, like, the husband in that, Hugh, is like, he's a dad and he has a belly and he's still lovely. But he's not like a sex symbol, but he symbolizes other things like support and comfort and affection and also a sexual vibe.
Or Garth's appreciation of Margaret, right?
Yes.
So Margaret is constantly dismissed by her family as being kind of the dull one, and she doesn't dress as well.
And the reliable one.
Yeah, and Garth just
he adores her.
Adores her, yeah.
Yeah, I do. I like to kind of offer different versions of relationships that... Yeah, some are with wildly sexy men, but most of them aren't.
Yeah.
But I don't know, people become sexy when they're nice or when you love them or when, that's how most things are.
Exactly. So I guess thinking about, as we're talking about sort of your representations of contemporary culture and sexuality and families and sort of the undercurrent of violence that sort of shapes representations of romance in Irish fiction, I wanted to just touch a little bit on activism. So our curatorial advisor is Maria Butler, who is writing a manuscript on your fiction.
Oh, yes, I've heard. Thank you.
Yeah,
yes.
And she's fantastic, and she's just been great with this show. And so she is writing a book that sort of examines your writing, and it's as a form of activism, right? And the way in which you're representing, really important issues, as you say, whether it's abortion rights or intimate partner violence or AIDS, or that all of these issues are you tangle with. I guess I'm curious about how you understand the balance between kind of the social commentary that you make in your works and the kind of pull of a dysfunction of a happy family or a dysfunctional or not even or a functional relationship, right? Like, are you alert to that tension when you're writing, and how do you think about that?
I mean, I think I'm a storyteller, and the storytelling has to come first. I mean, there can't be preaching, and there can't be sudden drops of exposition or too much information. And any research that I do has to be metabolized through me and then through the characters. I don't see the point in writing a book that doesn't touch off some challenges that is happening for, I suppose, women similar to my age. Like in My Favorite Mistake, there wasn't much. I mean, it was basically how, my issue in that was basically like how menopausal women are treated by doctors. And just in general, I suppose. And also like just the kind of the shock of being middle-aged and having accumulated a lot of things that we wished we hadn't done. But like then in other books, like the only book that I really decided to be deliberately activisty in is The Break. And that was because I wrote it in 2016, 2017, when we were coming up to a vote in Ireland to overturn the change to the constitution that made and I had no idea, and I don't think anybody really did, what Middle Ireland felt about a woman's right to abortion. And I thought, if I write a book where a young woman has to travel to a different country to have an abortion, and just the whole misery of it and the pointlessness of that fiction. So that was the only one where, like, I took a risk, and I thought, I don't know if I've achieved the balance here, but I thought, with this one, I don't care, it's too important. And as it turned out, I didn't need to write it at all, because Ireland had changed so much. Ireland wanted to repeal it.
Yeah, I'm gonna disagree there, because I think part of what your work does, right, is to normalize that. You know, that even young women who are seeking an abortion where it is legal in Ireland, right, have that experience represented sympathetically in your book, right? So the legacy of that sort of shame does not just go away. And as an American, I can tell you, that rule, that law might change, right? And so your book will still be there, right, for future readers. So I actually would say you very much needed to write that book, because books have legs, right?
Okay,
books have
that's
traction,
very nice.
You know?
Yes, yeah, but mostly the issue cannot be the thing, you know? It has got to be not secondary to the character and the story of the characters, but it can't... I suppose every book is different. I feel like if the characters are believable or interesting or likeable, that terrible word that we're supposed to not be chasing. But yeah, if the characters are sympathetic enough, the issue will, I don't know, work around them. But the characters have to come first, and the story has to come first, because there is no point other people won't read it. I wouldn't read it.
Well, then it's just a poster, right?
Yeah, exactly. Or it's a, you know, a short article. No, like, issues have to be humanized, and you know, they can be made small. They can be quite small, or they can be huge, like in This Charming Man. Like, I mean, that was completely about the behaviour of one very charming abuser with, you know, 4 really different women. And I mean, I love the women in it, but he was the main character, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it is interesting, though. I mean, I think the idea of pleasure is so, I mean, you know, like, my dream here from this show, which of course is like way over ambitious, is that romance can actually just be a descriptor.
Yeah.
Like, you can say romance fiction, people
I would
like,
love that.
Yes, I do that. That is what I do. I don't always do it, but I do that, and I can own it, right?
Can we reclaim it?
Exactly. I really want to reclaim it.
Yeah.
Because I think it speaks obviously to a long history of misogyny, right? Which, yes, all day, every day, that's the number one problem. But I also think it reflects another problem about our uncomfortable relationship with pleasure. You know? I mean, like, it is okay for me to come home and to read a cowboy romance, you know, which is kind of the genre of the moment in the States, right?
I know it.
Like,
I've read a couple. They're fabulous.
They're adorable, right?
Yeah.
You know, and I'm like, that doesn't make me a less engaged political citizen.
No, it
doesn't
doesn't.
make me a worse mother or partner or friend or cat owner, right? That it compromises nothing, and it gives me a breather that then enables me to go on marches.
I agree. Yes. I mean, like what we do with our leisure time. You know, what we're seeking is like a lot of things, mostly emotional regulation. And whether we do that from, like, you know, something unhealthy like drinking too much or driving too fast, or doom scrolling, which is just the worst, the most awful thing. Or, as you say, something that would be subject to the label the guilty pleasure. I mean, please, unless we are doing something really, 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 really dreadful, like, I don't know, having sex with a sheep, no pleasure should be guilty.
I know.
You know, if we're not hurting anyone else.
Exactly.
Yeah, and as you say, it gives us time away from, I don't know, the rough and tumble of current life. And, you know, we go for walks in nature. that can be lovely. But like reading...
And nobody's shaming it for you.
Nobody shames you. Or for like going to look at art. You don't get shamed there. But like anything that brings us... Anything that generates a bit of dopamine, you know, a bit of...
Oxytocin?
Yeah, you know, the emotion that makes you feel like you love people and
Yep.
they love you.
Yep.
Anything that does that, we should be chasing, we should be embracing it.
I know, it's very strange to me.
Yeah,
It's-
because there are many, many, many ways to pass the time and ways that make us feel worse. Let's not do that.
Exactly. So I'm very conscious of the fact that I could keep you locked in this room for another 20 years and talk to you. This is sort of a dream come true for me. I'm just going to put that out there.
Nice.
But I wanted you had wanted to talk a little bit about sort of Gen Z and romance.
Yes.
And I would like to have a little bit of that conversation, if you don't mind,
I
because I'm
would
curious
love
about
to.
because I do think that, you know, for all of the kind of criticisms that we make about social media, and they are many and deserved, the work that it has done for romance fiction, and
Yes.
I'm going to claim that label in this kind of final moment.
completely.
Like, can you talk a little bit about what effect you've seen, and also what maybe effect it's had on you personally as a writer?
Yes, I mean, okay, I love it. I love the whole thing. I love the way that they have completely thrown away the rule book and left traditional publishing reeling. I love the way these romantasy books come out of nowhere, go straight in at number one, and the traditional publishers have been appalled because they've, you know, spent money on a big advertising and publicity campaign for their, you know, their, I don't know, what would you call them, star billing author, and that this week was meant to be their week to get the number one spot, and then suddenly, is it Rebecca Yarros or somebody like that, has just kind of come along, and they have this massive fan base that is not accessible by whatever marketing methods the publishers are using. I mean, I love any kind of rebellion, and that feels very rebellious to me. And there's so much I love. I love the way that they have taken romantic fiction and they have not only embraced it, but they have broken it down into categories. Okay, so you have like enemies to lovers, you have the fake relationship, you have the close proximity, you have picking up where we left off. And like the categories just keep expanding. Like there are more and more and more. And like you can be really specific about the ones. I mean, the one I really love is the fake relationship one. And then, as you say, there's the situation ones, like there's the cowboy ones, there's the hockey ones, there's the millionaire ones. No, billionaire. No, forget the millionaires.
I will tell you this. Part of the exhibit is a kind of find your trope. So the term for those is tropes.
Yes.
So we have spent a great deal of time reading a great number of books. So when you go down in the exhibit, there will be a definition of a trope. Right?
Yes.
So there'll be something like enemies to lovers.
Yes.
And then a definition of enemies to lovers. And then you flip it over and there's a book by an Irish writer, a romance by an Irish writer that represents that
this
trope.
Is fantastic.
It's going to be so fun. I'm so psyched.
Oh, God. We need some GA. We need a hurling genre.
It's weird. There's no Irish sports romance. I looked. I was just like, sports romance is so huge in the States.
Yes.
Like, there's got to be one. I mean, if you know of one, we will put that in the trope ball tomorrow.
Or even if we could put like a shout out to to the Irish women who are writing genre romance. Is it okay to call it that? Sport romance.
Yep.
Come on, let's have a GAA one.
Exactly. That's romance writers or writers who write about romance. Right?
Yeah.
Like that's what Marian Keyes has made the call.
Yeah.
Right. We need a sports romance
I mean,
novel
that would
from
be
you guys.
amazing.
Wouldn't it be fun? I know.
It would be lovely.
I mean, it is. Like that's one of the reasons we did the trope exhibit is because I get so tired of people criticizing romance for sort of being formulaic, because I'm just like, everything's formulaic, like settle down, and the idea of like the whole point of romance is like, oh, okay, so I know what fake dating looks like, right? And like I know that trope, but what is this person going to do with it that's fun and unexpected?
But that's the thing, it may be formulaic, but it may be formulaic in that you know how it's going to end.
Exactly.
However, people are so great with backstories and characters and how their life is now and what happened to them that they ended up to get, having met each other. I mean, no book is like another, I don't think. I mean, because every imagination is different. Every writer has a different stamp, different tone. Like, people who call it formulaic, A, they're kind of missing the point, but B, they're not looking at the detail.
Exactly.
There are very few that I've kind of been disappointed with. Because, and I mean, there is also that lovely thing of like, this world is safe. You know, you're going in there, everything else is not safe. But like, you know that you're going on this journey, and like, you might get a fright, you might get shocked, you might get disappointed. But you know ultimately where you're going, people are going to be all right.
Right, that the form and the writer right, are holding you.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
They're keeping you safe.
Yes.
So you can have the ups and downs.
Yeah.
But unlike in real life,
Yeah.
you know by the time you get to the last page,
Yeah.
it's going to be okay.
Yes.
And sometimes even in real life it's okay, but we don't know that. You know?
That is so true. We don't know until we're there. And then even then we're kind of like, is this it? This is the happy time? Okay, quick.
What's in the book?
Yeah,
What's
exactly.
in the book?
It's in the book. Yeah. And you know, the whole thing of like dopamine, like I think all our heads are so fried from the negative things that we do to pass our time. But like, you go into a book like that and like you end with elevated chemicals in the head.
So it's a big joke in my family how much romance fiction I read, and I'm completely, as I said, like I also publish very important academic books.
Yes,
but, like, you know,
but this is the thing. You can be both. You can be everything,
and that is my goal, right? Because but it's the same thing you were saying about being a romance writer, right? I reflexively apologize for that. You know, like yes, but what's interesting? So like I have a son and a husband, and they watch me reading these things on my Kindle. And my husband is a huge sort of amateur neurologist, right? He loves learning about sort of brain stuff.
Lovely.
And so he was listening to this woman, Anna Lemke, who is a researcher of dopamine. And do you know what's interesting about her? She wrote a book called Dopamine Nation, and she has a podcast.
Oh, yes.
But in that, she uses as an example of problematic dopamine, romance fiction. She talks about how she had sort of lost control over the time that she spent reading romance. And that becomes her example of like the problem, the bad dopamine hit. There are lots of bad ways to get dopamine.
Yeah,
but
this
I'm
isn't
not
one
entirely
of them.
sure that romance fiction by women writers, which supports the whole publishing industry and gives people ways of imagining how they might be happy.
That's what I love about what the Youngs are doing, you know, with Book Talk.
Exactly.
Yeah, they don't care. They will not be shamed.
I love it. It's
I
so
love
great.
it too. I find they give me an awful lot of courage.
Yeah, and a lot of support, right?
Yes.
So we have an exhibit. Part of the exhibit also focuses on Book Talk and Goodreads and all of these sort of ground-breaking sort of
movements are
the way and how they're led by young women who have who are confident in asserting their sort of enthusiasm.
I know, they're fantastic. They are absolutely wonderful.
Okay, so I'm going to let you go, but I'm going to ask you one question that we're asking people that we interview at the end, and that is there a romance novel that you read at some point in your life or even recently that you really enjoyed that you could recommend to listeners? And we've it could be anything from I don't know, Pride and Prejudice to I don't even an Anna Huang novel. It's like whatever. Is there something that you've read either recently or earlier in your life where like maybe the thing that made you decide to write Watermelon instead of like a crime novel, that kind of thing?
Oh, you see, I mean, the book that I am absolutely raving about at the moment is The Ministry of Time by Kellyanne Bradley. Have you read it?
No, but I've seen it.
Oh my God. I mean, it's a book about lots and lots and lots of things. It's speculative fiction. It's about people who have, the British government have discovered time travel and they've plucked various people from, kind of 150 years ago and further back. And our narrator is working for the Ministry of Time, and one of her job is really to help her. They call them expat. There's a lot of sexual tension, there's a lot of stuff. I mean, but it is a love story, among other things. I loved that. Let me see. Jilly Cooper wrote a lot of, before she wrote her big bunkbusters, she wrote books about, they all have women's names like Octavia and Harriet and Lydia and things like that. And I read them, I think, in the early 80s. And they were very, very similar to what I did. They were about women in the world, dealing with their stuff and falling in love.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's interesting because a big buzzword right now in the field of Irish studies, right, the kind of academic field of Irish studies is transnationalism. And I think what's kind of great is you're pointing out that for like readers and writers of romance, right?
Yeah.
Moving across national boundaries,
Yeah.
which we see vividly with social media, right?
Yes.
And digital platforms.
Yeah.
Also happened when, a young Irish woman is reading the British Jilly Cooper,
Yeah.
right? And so that those kind of fruitful interchanges, I think, are really important to produce distinctively Irish fiction, right?
Yes.
That
She gave me the template for the book I wanted to write, I suppose. But I came to it as an Irish woman.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yes.
So, Marian Keyes, I cannot tell you what a completely pleasurable and delightful experience it was to talk with you. Like I said,
And
a fan
likewise.
of many, many years.
Thank
and
you
to be
so
able to ask you
much.
questions that have just been sort of in my head as I've read your many novels over the years in person has been a real gift. So thank you so much
It
for
was my
sharing with us.
absolute pleasure, Paige. Thank
Yeah.
you so much for having me.
Thanks.